Hi, this is Dan Lynch. Join Aaron Newcomb and I for FLOSS Weekly, where we'll be talking to Justin Reock from OpenLogic about how to promote open source and community versions of projects into enterprise. You don't want to miss it. That's coming up next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 539, recorded Wednesday, July 24th, 2019. OpenLogic. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Command Line Heroes, the original podcast from Red Hat. It's back for its third season, and this time it's all about the epic history of programming languages. Episode 3 explores the 10 days that shook the web forever. Go to redhat.com/heroes or listen to and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab, with more than $500 million of equipment, including solutions from key partners like VMware. And it's virtual, so you can get access 24/7. To learn more and get insights into everything it offers, go to wwt.com/twit. Hello and welcome to FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Dan Lynch, and you'll be able to tell by now that I am not the usual co-host, Randall Schwartz, who's unfortunately away this week, but we send him our best wishes and he should be back very, very soon. But thankfully, I'm not on my own today. I have a wonderful, talented co-host in the shape of Aaron Newcomb. Aaron, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you? What shape is that? Am I square? I can tell you actually what shape, but I'm a little bit more round these days.
Oh, well, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. Although I did say in the shape of Aaron Newcomb, so that kind of gives me a get out to whatever shape you are. That's fine. Yeah, so it's good to be back. So I'm calling in from Liverpool in the UK, as usual, in my very hot, I have to say, a very hot kind of studio today. There's a mini heat wave here in the UK right now, which you guys will laugh out over there in much hotter climes than ours. But it's about 32 degrees C in the studio today, and there's no aircon. I've just had to switch all of that kind of stuff off. We don't usually have aircon in this country, so if I seem like I'm melting, I probably am a little bit. But Aaron, where are we speaking to you from?
Yeah, the usual spot. I'm here at home, just taking a break from work to jump in here and co-host. So yeah, just sitting here in my office, getting work done.
Excellent. And yeah, we've both kind of jumped in at the last minute, but as I said to you on the email, it was a kind of a chance to figuratively get the band back together, since we did a show together quite recently, so that's nice.
I know I didn't expect to be back together so soon, but I will not pass an opportunity to co-host a show with you, Dan.
Oh, yeah. Well, same here. There you go. So the band's back together. So today we should talk about our guest we've got coming on today. So as you'll probably be able to tell, because Aaron and I have really just kind of run in at the last minute, I've been frantically trying to do some research on our guest for today. He's from OpenLogic, which is just being in the process of being rebranded apparently. So yeah, our guest today is Justin Reock, who's from OpenLogic. He's the chief architect over there, and we're going to find out more about what they're doing. They're trying to promote open source in business and so on. They say they're dedicated to bringing widespread adoption of community open source projects to the enterprise, which sounds great. That sounds right up our kind of street. So any chance you know anything about this more than I do, Aaron?
No, I have not heard about it, but there is a need for projects like this to actually, because a lot of times what happens is you're dealing with an open source. If you're running an open source project, you really don't have the time nor sometimes the expertise to figure out how you're going to either commercialize or just keep the project running in general, right? Because this thing does take time. Sometimes you have expenses that you need to cover, even though you're giving away a product for free. So it'll be interesting to see what his take is on that particular problem.
Yeah, I'm sure it will, and lots of other things too. I know he's very knowledgeable on lots of things, and we'll get into lots of kind of open source, free software stuff. What's going on in the community right now. So before we do that, I should take a moment to thank one of our sponsors for today and tell you a little bit more about the Red Hat Command Line Heroes podcast, which is supporting the show today. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Command Line Heroes, the original podcast from Red Hat. It's 1995. The browser wars are in full swing. A young developer at Netscape embarks on a 10-day coding sprint that will result in a new language and a change the web forever. This is the story of JavaScript. Command Line Heroes is back for its third season, and it's all about programming languages this time, from C to Lisp to Ruby to Go. The podcast dives into the origin stories of some of the most prominent languages around today. Episode 3 documents Netscape's Hail Mary attempt to win the war of the browsers with its new lightweight interpreted language, and how that would fuel a revolution in web development that's still ongoing. Command Line Heroes, an original podcast from Red Hat, is all about the people who transform tech from the command line up. To listen and subscribe, head over to the podcast platform of your choice or visit redhat.com/heroes. That's redhat.com/heroes. There you'll find full episodes as well as bonus content, and you can even test out your skills on the Command Line Bash arcade game. That's redhat.com/heroes. And we thank them for their support of Floss Weekly. All right then, and with that done, we should go ahead and bring on our guest, Justin Reock. Justin, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thanks, Dan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So where are we speaking to you from then?
Our brand new house down in Kissimmee, Florida, actually, Dan. We moved here from Asheville, North Carolina, just a few weeks ago. It's probably why you're hearing a little bit of an echo in the room. It is completely empty. This will be my new office one day.
Ah, okay, excellent. So it looks nice. It looks like quite a blank canvas at the moment, but that's good because that means it gives you space to express yourself. Get some posters up and some stickers and things. I don't know.
My wife says that those are good design principles. I wouldn't know.
Fair enough. And you're down in Florida, so you must think it's hilarious that I find this relatively low heat compared to yours over here in the UK. A little bit of sun, and we all kind of lose it. We've had 2 days of sun, and people are passing out in the street and stuff. So is it really hot down there?
It's not that bad. We've had a little bit of time to acclimatize. I actually prefer the cooler weather. It's about, we use Fahrenheit here, and I'm an American engineer, so I have no idea how to do that conversion, but it's probably 93 to 94 Fahrenheit right now. But, it's temperate in the evenings, temperate in the mornings, and this is about the worst it's going to get. So.
Ah, excellent. I was just about to try and look up the conversion, but we won't worry. It's whatever it is, it's going to be significantly hotter there, I imagine, than we are here. We're ill-equipped to deal with this because it never happens. So we don't have aircon and we don't have any of that kind of stuff.
That's
just
why
one or 2 days.
I'm going to hold it against you. You're not used to that kind of weather over there.
True.
And I lived in Atlanta for a long time, and we would have the occasional snowstorm. It might happen once a year. And the city, it just wasn't worth it for them to prepare to get the salt and the trucks or anything because it just didn't happen very often. So when it did happen, the entire city just completely shuts down. But it's not their fault. They're not used to it. So.
Yeah, apparently. So Aaron's thankfully done the conversion for us in the background there. 93 degrees Fahrenheit is about 33 degrees Celsius. So not far off what we're getting here, really. It's 32, 33. Anyway, we should probably leave Weather Weekly for another show before people think all I'm going to do is talk about the weather. So Justin, you're the chief architect at OpenLogic. So tell us a bit about OpenLogic. What do you guys do over there?
Yeah, sure. So we've actually been in business for a while. It started out as a company almost 20 years ago now with the intention of being able to perform software audits against an enterprise's code base for the purpose of being able to suss out which bits of community open source are actually running within that code base and then be able to link those to licenses so that people would be able to understand their obligations to certain types of licenses and things like that. It was really useful for ISVs and people who were maybe shipping software that had open source components in it. But that business has sort of changed. That area of the business was sunset a few years ago. And we're now focusing on what we're kind of calling our community open source support. And the spirit of this offering is open source, to back up a little bit, is something that means an awful lot to me. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta in the late 80s, early 90s, to date myself a little bit. It was the same story as a lot of us big nerds. Dad brought home an old PC, like it was a Tandy 1000 model for work. He never used it. I fell in love with it. But as I started getting more involved in it, I needed more toys. I needed better operating systems. I needed programming languages to mess with. And my parents had no idea what those things were or how, if they were worth the type of money that I was asking to get a C compiler or something like that. So when Linux came out, in the 90s, and then I all of a sudden started to get some exposure to like the GCC toolchain and Perl and all these open source languages and frameworks, I had this ability to learn and kind of grow, despite, I think, the limitations of where we were at with technology at the time. I mean, it was still just obscure, and I was just a big nerd, and nobody knew what these computer things were going to do, and it was just pre-commercial internet. So anyway, long story short, if it was not for free software, if it was not for these projects, I would not be having this conversation with you right now. I would not have had the type of resources that I needed to grow in the direction that I did. So I want to give back. And one of the great ways, I think, to give back, to really make a global impact, is to encourage the adoption of community open source in the enterprise. And I really do mean the community projects, not the enterprise editions. We're talking pure Postgres, not enterprise DB. We're talking Kubernetes, not OpenShift. Okay, I mean the real core community editions of these projects. What's often, when we do that, when enterprises actually get comfortable with that and they make that cultural shift to adopt those and understand that there are things you can do to mitigate your risk and understand that there are a lot of benefits to using the non-locked-in community editions. When they get comfortable with that, these enterprises tend to start giving back to these communities, right, in a lot of different forms. Maybe they're hiring people directly out of the communities. Maybe they're contributing code. Maybe they're sponsoring events. But the point is that a symbiosis starts to exist between these enterprises and these software communities. And when we encourage that, then these communities grow faster and they innovate faster. And when we encourage that globally as a species, we innovate faster. So it may be self-aggrandized, but I really do feel very good about the work that we're doing every morning when I get up, because I think that we're truly helping the world speed up its innovation by encouraging open and community-driven design principles and encouraging enterprises to get comfortable with those solutions. So that's the why. What we actually do is sort of three-tier. We have a support offering, which looks and feels like your typical kind of tech support experience, right? So as if you had bought the enterprise edition of a piece of software, or if you were dealing with a piece of commercial software, it's the type of support experience that you would expect if you had actually paid money for that software. We also have sort of a professional services offering as well. This is going to be more of our consulting type of work. And then we have training across a number of these technologies. So really the idea is to be able to provide kind of a comprehensive experience where we're able to bring knowledge about these projects into a business. We're able to actually help with some of the migration, some of the integration, some of the adoption, and then we're able to continue to support those projects for as long as the business needs it. So it's like you get all the benefits of that lack of a vendor lock-in. You get all that benefit of using the real core community editions of this software, but you don't lose anything. You don't take on additional risks. You get what you would normally be paying through an enterprise contract. So I know it's kind of a long story about what and why we do what we do, but I think it's an important one because as a company, we now have, I think, sort of a unique perspective into what larger organizations are adopting in terms of community open source, where they're being successful, and where the lifespan and the future of a lot of these projects is kind of headed. That's difficult information to get when you're dealing with software that's publicly available in public repositories, and anybody who wants to can just anonymously download it and start using it. It's really hard to figure out, what businesses are actually using. But to be able to actually serve a lot of these businesses in their adoption of open source, we're able to, I think, kind of get this perspective. And so that's where, when I talk about it's okay if we have just sort of a generalist discussion, that's good because, our business model and the work that I do is very generalist. It's not necessarily supporting one project, it's supporting hundreds, and it's not supporting one use case. It's, permutations of a lot of different use cases.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds fantastic. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you said there, I know chimes very closely with the kind of principles that we promote on this show. So, open source development and sharing of stuff using community editions. One of the things we talk about a fair amount, especially when Simon's on, because it's something that he's really keeps an eye on, basically, but is this kind of open core model thing that a lot of projects have kind of. There's not a lot of projects. Some projects have moved towards lately where they'll have, a tool with some of the tool will be open source underneath, but then a lot of the other stuff will be on top. And you said you're promoting the community versions of projects. So is that something that you've seen grow, this kind of open core model? Do you think it's growing at the moment, or is that something that we're managing to kind of arrest a little bit? No,
it absolutely is growing. And it's not something that I can just say blanket one way or another is good. It's on a case by case and company by company basis. There's a couple of qualifiers that I really look like. When I mean good, I guess I mean the opposite of evil good, right? Yeah. And so what I look for in some of these companies is, so they're trying to monetize open source. That's fine. It's been clear since the days of the Free Software Foundation that trying to monetize, for instance, the means of distribution of your software or something like that, there's nothing wrong with that. You can obviously can monetize open source and build off of that. Where I start really paying close attention is if your business model is limiting that software's freedom, right? So the GPL or software specific stuff. If I'm starting to now take this core code, and be able to deploy it in such a way where I can throw DRM in front of it, or if somebody gets that core to do security testing, that they're technically violating the DMCA, that's when I start getting a little nervous, right? I think maintaining that software freedom is paramount, even if you want to monetize it. So what does that look like? I take a company like Enterprise DB, for instance. It's a commercial arm of the Postgres database project. This is an example of an enterprise company that I actually believe is doing a very good job. I think they're giving a lot back to the community. I think they provide a lot of mutual benefit for the community. I think that they open a lot of the additional functionality that they add that makes sense for enterprises to their project. They sponsor these communities. They put a lot of money into Postgres events and that kind of thing. Percona also very similar in the way that they do business, and a company that I think kind of does this the right way. So I look for those types, and I'm not gonna pick on anybody and give a negative case necessarily, but those are some of the qualifiers that I really look for. So I think it can work. I think it's a less creative way of making money off of the project or making money off of the software. I've always kind of been of the belief with anything digital that if 1 million people are using your product and you're not making money, that's on you. You're not really being creative enough about the way that you're monetizing, right? So again, I really think case by case. But in terms of what we're seeing, we're seeing a ton of it. But what's interesting to me is that typically, and this isn't every case, this is certainly not every case, but typically, I'd wager to say as high as 75% of the time, when businesses are actually purchasing the enterprise or commercial editions of that product, they're really just interested in the support. They're not even necessarily using some of the add-on features. And I mean, again, there are exceptions to this, but in general, that's really what we're seeing. Most people are just interested in the support. So when we come along and say, well, there's other ways to get this knowledge, there's other ways to build code ownership within your business where you can, support this technology using some other vector besides just paying for an enterprise license, and then get out of that ecosystem lock-in that comes with buying that enterprise edition. We, of course, would encourage that. So I would just really, the advice that I give to most people is take a look at the feature set that comes with the enterprise edition. Make sure it's something that you're really going to use, right? Know how it's going to be valuable to you, not just, it comes with some better monitoring. Okay, great. What is that monitoring? How do you set it up? Are you actually going to use it? Are people going to get value out of that? And if you can answer enough of those questions with a solid yes, then maybe it is a good idea. Maybe it is worth the money to buy the enterprise edition. The support question is too, do I have the knowledge internally to support this? Are there other organizations or other partners that I work with that might be able to provide this type of knowledge? You really want to weigh, what you can do yourself with what's provided to you by this company, and just make sure that it's worth the money. I also really recommend you take a look at their pricing model. This one really varies across multiple companies as well. There are some companies that provide a pricing model that's, I'm just going to go ahead and say it's a bait and switch model. They start out with smaller build outs and smaller footprints, costing less per unit. And then when you get into a larger build out, when all of a sudden this technology is now very valuable to you and it's stuck inside of your critical infrastructure, that's when they turn around and jack up the per unit pricing on you. Once this technology makes its way into your infrastructure, and then it's going to be very expensive and risky for you to get rid of it, that's when they jack the prices up on you. So you want to make sure that you're looking into that too. So I just, be aware of some of those indicators, because there is absolutely a gold rush happening right now. Obviously open source has been around for a long time, but let's say less technical, more business interested entities have figured out over the last 10 years that you can just take one of these community projects, brand it however you want, slap a license on it, and start making money. And you want to be careful of, I think, people who are trying that approach. It's just, in my mind, antithetical and possibly even pernicious.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things to be aware about there. And we've got a question from the chat room, actually, which is, sure. Have you got a cat with you? Because we can hear some people in the chat room asking if your cat's okay, because it's meowing a bit or something.
He's fine. I really apologize. He's outside of my office. No, and like I said, we're just getting this new house together. He's an old cat. He is a stone deaf 15-year-old tuxedo tabby named October. And he just doesn't know how loud. Yeah, he doesn't know how loud he is.
Okay. No, that's okay. Well, October's welcome on the show if he wants. You're welcome to let him in, and we don't mind. It's okay. We can have an extra guest.
If he comes back to the door, I'll let him in. I'll bring him up on.
No problem. Yeah, it was just some people in the chat room were saying, "Is their cat okay? Does it need feeding? Does it, all that kind of stuff?" But we liked that. I thought maybe he had some strong opinions on open source there, and he was just kind of wanting to voice those.
maybe he does, but he charges for his advice. He's more on the commercial side.
He's too smart. Yeah. Excellent. All right. And so, Aaron, anything you want to ask? I don't want to hog the whole show on you.
That's okay. Yeah, I did have a couple of questions. The first one is just to clear up a point of potential confusion. If folks have looked at your lower third and are looking for openlogic.org, I believe it is, when you go there, it does take you to a Rogue Wave software, I believe. And I was able to find OpenLogic by going to products and then clicking on open source solutions. But can you briefly just explain the relationship here between OpenLogic and Rogue Wave?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a little bit confusing right now because we're actually in the midst of our second acquisition. So it's all about to change again. When I came into Rogue Wave, it was through this company called OpenLogic. OpenLogic was the original brand, and that was the product that started as an auditing and governance and management platform for community open source, and then sort of evolved into the support offerings that we have now. That company was acquired by Rogue Wave Software, which is a more general purpose software solutions company, a little over 5 years ago now. I want to say it was 2013. And then most recently, Perforce has acquired Rogue Wave, and we are rebranding our open source offerings back underneath the OpenLogic brand. So going forward, we will now be OpenLogic by Perforce, but it's the same team, same offering, same services. So I apologize that it's a little bit confusing right now, but at least hopefully for posterity, if you watch this recording, we'll have the new site and the new branding up, and it'll be a little bit less confusing for you.
Okay, great. And just to clarify, I couldn't see the screen because I was looking at your website, but it's openlogic.com. Which makes sense, actually, since you are providing a commercial solution, a support solution, it seems like, for open source software. So it is openlogic.com. I just wanted to clarify. And thanks for that explanation. If someone came to you, you've been talking about the advantages of using, straight open source and some of the watch-outs, so to speak, for using the enterprise versions of some of these projects. I'm just kind of
I'm going to pause you really quick because my cat is asking for in again. And if the audience wants the cat, the audience gets the cat. So give me just a second.
Yeah, please bring the cat in. That would be great.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so have we had a cat on the show before? Is this I don't know. How many cats have we had on the show, I suppose?
Yeah, occasionally my cats will jump up and surprise me. But it hasn't happened too often on the show.
Cool.
October.
There you go. Oh, he's really cute.
That's fine. He's just loud and old and doesn't know how loud and old he is.
Oh, that's a cute kitty. All right. That's great.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
We'll welcome a fourth on today's episode. That's no problem. So what I was going to ask is, if someone comes to you and they want support for enterprise, do you also do that, or do you say, no, we really specialize, just in the pure open source versions of these particular projects?
That's a great question. What we'll generally position ourselves in that point is say, like, look, we support a whole bunch of different technologies. So if your solution involves an enterprise branded piece of software, and what we're troubleshooting involves, working with or looking at that software, we're not going to just be like, oh, sorry, that's not our problem. Go away and talk to that other vendor. It kind of depends. Sometimes we'll get on like a conference call and act as sort of a customer advocate. We'll act with that third party vendor. Sometimes we know enough about the technology to just work our way through it, and we don't even have to involve the other vendor. We're pretty flexible about the way that we handle it, because again, like, we're not shipping a product. So when we put things together like a contract or a pricing or anything like that, it's all on the honor system. We don't have phone home audit software that we're making people plug into and do counting and stuff like that. So really, we can be pretty flexible about the type of support that we provide. I should also add that the support is entirely staffed with enterprise architects. So these aren't like, we didn't like train a call center with scripts and stuff like that. This is really more sort of almost like an architectural think tank group that happens to do some things that look and feel like a tech support group looks and feels. So we're able to go a little bit further. So I don't explicitly know, but we obviously, encourage people to really try the community edition and kind of like I said before, be really thoughtful about why you're using the enterprise edition.
And do you offer a service that does exactly that? Will you come in and say, look, we're going to do a cost benefit analysis for you of, you're using, whether you should use an enterprise version and pay X amount of dollars, or where you can actually maybe save some money and just use the pure open source model?
We've done exactly that type of work. And most recently, it's coming up a lot because of this Oracle and OpenJDK debacle, where Oracle's kind of changed their support subscription pricing for Java 8. We're seeing a lot of businesses now very interested in adopting OpenJDK as opposed to Oracle JDK. And so we've done a number of migration services around that. In fact, I think we've fleshed out and really put together a really solid service and plan for helping somebody to put together a roadmap like that. Another big one that we see a lot of is people actually migrating from Red Hat Enterprise Linux over to CentOS, which is, bit by bit the same operating system as Red Hat, but because of the terms of the GPL license that come with the Linux kernel, and obviously a lot of that supporting software, Red Hat is in fact legally bound to keep a public GPL edition of Red Hat Enterprise Linux open, and that's the CentOS operating system. So we've seen interest in people migrating all or parts of their environment over to that platform as well. People going from Confluent to Community Kafka, people going from Puppet Enterprise to regular Puppet, people going from things like Ansible Tower to Ansible AWX. I mean, I think, once you can get a solid strategy for support, then it suddenly you just eliminate a lot of the risk of going with the community edition of a piece of software, and you really do get a lot of benefit. You get a lot of additional agility and a lot of additional freedom.
You mentioned CentOS, which is interesting. I mean, do you ever get any pushback? Because Red Hat actually owns that project now, right? Dan is reminding me in chat that Red Hat actually owns CentOS. So, I mean, it seems like in one aspect, by enabling folks to use CentOS rather than RHEL, Red Hat and now IBM technically might get a little upset at that you're, even though they own the CentOS project, you're actually pushing people away from their paid solution. I mean, does that ever come back to bite you, or they get upset with you over that?
It's funny. We thought they would. I mean, they can't really do much because the GPL is the GPL and software copyright is software copyright. But we never wanted to position ourselves as being, against Red Hat, just sort of an alternative. If you have a customer who's interested in a full ecosystem out of a box, and there's plenty of people who just want to do that, Red Hat's the way to go. If you want somebody who wants something that's a little bit more granular and a little bit more free and flexible, and you're willing to do a little bit more legwork on your own, then the community edition is the way to go. We just want to make sure that both types of profiles have options. The IBM Red Hat stuff is interesting too, because we actually partner with IBM. We actually are the tier 3 and tier 4 entities that support their support of open source from their technology support services division, which is also where their Red Hat support comes from. So the three of us are actually all involved. In fact, next week I'll be speaking at a seminar for IBM right next to folks from Red Hat and right next to folks from SUSE, and actually I think EDB is going to be there too, but a number of other enterprise open source companies. And we all just kind of get along. We have a different approach to how we're trying to present this software. But I think we're all kind of on the right side of things. The IBM relationship has been particularly interesting. It's been hard, I think, for the world at large to give IBM the credit that they deserve in the open source space. But if you go back and look at statistics over the last few years, I mean, IBM has consistently been within top 5 in terms of the number of commits and contributions that they're making in GitHub. They just, a really interesting article just came out today. They just open sourced 3 different machine learning and AI algorithms that are being used to determine new cures for cancer. 3 different projects, the Pac-Man project, Interact, and PIMKL, I think was the other one. So IBM is a thought leader in the open source space, kind of whether we want to believe that or not. They are, and they're really embracing it. And I think their bet on Red Hat and their partnership with us are kind of a couple of symptoms of their bet on that. So it was weird. I got to tell you, when I first started working with them closely a few years ago, I was like, man, this doesn't feel like me. This doesn't feel like what I'm doing. But I've been actually very impressed in IBM's humility and willingness to realize that they need to change aspects of their culture if they want to be successful around open source.
Yeah, it feels to me like they are it's still smarting in a way from the whole PC revolution, right, where people kind of came after them after that. And I think that it reverberates even today. I will say one thing, though, about Red Hat, which is anybody that was at Red Hat Summit in Boston last year, I think, at least I did, saw that Red Hat really doubling down on their open source mantra. And I think it was probably a reaction to just what you were talking about, IBM was swallowing them up. It had already been announced. But they had a whole keynote on one day that was just dedicated to open source. And the writing was kind of on the wall. It's like, oh, yeah, they're trying to reassure people here that they really are committed to open source. One more question for you, which is, bringing in kind of the cloud angle here, and especially Kubernetes. I mean,
Sure.
You mentioned some examples of companies that have kind of done this the right way when they're offering an enterprise solution. But Kubernetes really stands out in my mind as kind of a jewel, if you will, in open source, in that most companies that I've encountered are adopting it. I mean, there really isn't there are services wrapped around it, right? But I mean, it really is pure open source. It stands on its own, and companies are adopting it in a very aggressive manner because of that. I'm just kind of curious to get your take on Kubernetes. Is that kind of a model, going forward that we can expect from the open source community? What do you think about that?
The model being kind of an ecosystem type of project, or the model being
an ecosystem type of project that doesn't really have an enterprise component to it, or a open core component.
Sure. So it's certainly not. I wouldn't call it like a single vendor open core, but there is branded Kubernetes out there, right?
Sure.
The OpenShift project from Red Hat. IBM's IBM Cloud Private, their ICP platform, is actually all Kubernetes, right? But you're right in that you don't see people like selling an off-the-shelf version of Kubernetes. It's really more about like, can we do managed services for you? Can we host it for you? That kind of thing is where we're seeing it. Kubernetes is an amazing project. I mean, I think that just kind of goes without saying. I mean, Docker on its own was pretty cool, but we couldn't really say that Docker was anything new because we'd had containers for a long time. We've had Shroots since the 70s. We had, Solaris zones in the early aughts and the early 2000s. We've always known that isolation, process isolation, and modularity is the best way to achieve compute power at scale. That's why we have things like 12-factor. That's why Martin Fowler talks about that so much, and that's why he's right. And what we have now is new tooling to facilitate that modularity, right? And the idea of a microservice or the idea of a completely modular application is nothing new. We've always known that those are good. It's always been really hard for us to say, okay, well, I want to split this one monolithic application into 800 separate applications, and I want to deploy it across 15 availability zones and blah, blah, blah. That's hard, all right? So now that we have a solution that allows us to isolate that app, that microservice inside a single container, that being something like Docker, and now that we have the gaps filled in around how do we orchestrate these containers at scale, we really do have an answer to how we maintain Moore's law compute power and things like that going into the future when we're not necessarily increasing our sorry, my cat's messing around in the corner there. Where we're not necessarily increasing our clock speed, right? Instead, we're just shoving more and more processors and more cores into the substrate. So it's a fantastic project. It's I think another example where it's very easy to point fingers at large companies and say, hey, you're not doing any good, but Google did give us this for free, and we're all getting a lot of benefit out of it. It's a really amazing project. So I think what I'm seeing in terms of adoption, enterprise and especially like financial tech and healthcare and stuff like that, these are obviously going to be segments of the industry that are late adopters. They're just starting to pick into these technologies, but they're actually going to have a lot of advantages because a lot of mistakes have already been made. And they're going to come in at a time where I feel like we've got, it's much easier to approach Kubernetes now than it was just a couple of years ago. Anybody can sit down and run Minikube on their laptop and have a full Kubernetes implementation ready to play with in a couple of minutes. KubeSpray can actually help us build like professional quality enterprise grade Kubernetes implementations very easily. So it's a good time for them to be coming into it. But I do see a solid spread. I see some people wanting to stand it up on their own. These are typically going to be companies with a little bit more of a software in their DNA type of approach. So maybe your managed services companies, your logistics companies, people like that. We're seeing people go with a hosted solution. So your Nutanix, your Clouderas, that kind of thing. And those are your small to mid-size and less, I would say, software-focused businesses. And then the enterprises, I have to say, OpenShift is winning right now in the enterprise. Most of the large Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies are either considering OpenShift or they've already put OpenShift into their business.
That's really interesting to hear that, to get those kind of those figures and stuff directly. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a second. I've got lots more questions for you about cloud stuff, Justin. But before we do that, I need to thank our sponsor, one of our other sponsors. And it fits in very nicely with this topic, actually. So this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Worldwide Technology. WWT began building their Advanced Technology Center, or ATC, 10 years ago, and it has grown exponentially. It's like no other testing and research lab. The lab contains more than $500 million in equipment from hundreds of OEMs, ranging from high-tech heavyweights like VMware, Dell EMC, and Microsoft, to emerging disruptors like Equinix. WWT is a trusted partner who stays with you over the years. Many of their customers have been with them for over a decade because they know WWT is where they can go to get the answers they need to make sure their business runs right. Their ATC is an incubator for IT innovation and offers hundreds of on-demand integrated solutions labs representing the newest advances in network virtualization, software-defined data center, security, digital workspace, multi-cloud architecture, and automation. Learn more about the products before you launch. WWT's engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proofs of concept and pilots using the sandbox so customers can confidently select the best solutions. In many cases, This reduces concept time from months to weeks and increases the speed to market. They offer a lab as a service, a dedicated lab space within the ATC. Here, customers can perform programmatic testing using the vast technology ecosystem that WWT has already built. It's virtual, so you can take advantage of ATC's unique benefits anywhere in the world 24/7. So to learn more about WWT, the ATC, and get insights into their newest features with demos and labs, you need to go to wwt.com/twit. That's wwt.com/twit. WWT simplifies the complex. WWT, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. And we thank them for their support of Floss Weekly. All right, and so that does kind of tie in to what we were talking about. So you were talking about OpenShift and some of the Kubernetes stuff there that I was really interested in. Now, something I've some friends have been telling me about recently, some engineers that I know were telling me about a problem that's kind of cropped up with the proprietary software model, if you like, and containers and cloud stuff, is the licensing things. Because there was a friend of mine was telling me recently they had a product that used to be licensed per core, and now the company are trying to license it per instance on a thing. And if you run in something like Kubernetes and you could fire up 100 or 1,000 instances of something, that's changes. That it doesn't really fit with that traditional kind of licensing model of business, does it?
No, and it won't. That business model is antiquated at this point. It's not that we'll never be able to monetize software. We're absolutely always going to be able to monetize software. I just believe we're going to move away from a method where the most common means of monetizing software is paying for a license, because I just don't think that these proprietary solutions are going to be able to innovate at the same click. Nor do I think that businesses are going to be able to adopt them at the same click. I like to kind of take a textbook example when I talk about these advantages of something like community open source. Let's say that I've got a data science project that I need to work on. And to do this, I need 50 compute nodes, let's say running some kind of analysis engine. I don't care what it is. But let's go down both paths, all right? Let's go down the commercial proprietary path first, all right? Well, I got to provision my nodes. I have to go with a commercial operating system. That means I have to get with procurement, because I need to get 50 new license keys for my 50 new operating systems that I have to stand up. Then I need to track down that media, because that media is not publicly distributable. So whoever's got it, my IT, my DevOps, whomever, I need them to stand up those businesses, register the licenses. Okay, great. That'll take me, a week maybe if I'm lucky. Now I've got my operating systems. Well, okay, now I need my database. Okay, so maybe back to Oracle. We're going to get 50 more licenses. I don't know. We're going to go through procurement. We got another week at least, so we're going to be tied up. And I need my analytics engine too. All right. So we're talking maybe 4 weeks, if we're lucky, before this project can even start, before we even have our environment stood up to be able to start doing this type of work. Because you can't. A lot of these modern problems that we're solving, like big data problems and ML problems and stuff like that, you can't just do it on your laptop. You need a powerful substrate ready to help you solve these problems, ready to go. So then reverse that. I stand up 50 instances of CentOS through an automated script using something to provision my hardware through Pixie Boot. I pull down CentOS ISO from public repositories. I install Postgres. I install Spark. I do that all through Ansible, and I go home early. I'm ready to start my project the next morning. So simple evolution, simple thermodynamics, simple conservation of energy proves out to me that this license model is just not going to survive.
Yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit like, they're fighting the tide on this one. As you say, it's just not going to, this is the way the world's going, and things are going to change. Things are going to keep changing. So interestingly, with containers and stuff, a lot of people, it's really taken off and stuff. And as you were talking to Aaron there before, I mean, it feels to me a little bit like a lot of this stuff is like technology that we've had for a very long time, like BSD jails and things like that. But they seem, the Docker really seems to have caught the imagination because it's got this great branding around it. It's been pushed, it's been adopted. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it's just caught the imagination, but it doesn't feel like anything massively new to me. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that.
It's not massively new at all, not even in concept. I mean, we've been talking about modular development since the 60s, but again, when we started developing applications through the 90s, big business applications, Java EE or J2EE as it was called back then was kind of king. And the whole Java methodology was, let's pull dependencies from a whole bunch of different places and let's shove it all into a big monolith, and let's put a bunch of interface classes around here and a whole bunch of API hooks, and that's how people are going to interact with our application, and we're just going to build this giant monolith with tons of calls. And in fairness, it made sense to the underlying substrates and tooling that we had to do our deployment back then. I mean, this was in the time of VMs. And this was in the time of build tools like Maven, and we didn't have mature SDLC, and it was hard to do releases, and it was hard to do deployments and things like that. We didn't have tooling that facilitated better ways of doing this type of development and deployment that we already knew existed, right? And what are some of these textbook problems, right? I mean, okay, so I go buy a $10,000 server to stick a business application, one application on it that has to run in isolation. It's using 2% of that server's resources. The rest of it's all just sitting idle, but I can't share it with anything because it might break. Okay, that's why we got VMs. That helped us with that problem. But now I've got to run 100 versions of an operating system on a physical machine, one operating system per VM. Again, just all to support my app, which at the end of the day, we can talk about containers and services and deployment and cloud, but people only care about the app, right? All of these things are just in service to the app. So the container, the notion of a container gets us even closer to where the app is taking up most of the metal, right? We're not sharing resources with 100 different operating systems and things like that. So these concepts are nothing new. We've known about them since the 60s. We've had various incarnations of containers, like you mentioned, BSD jails. We've had Shroots, Solaris Zones, Solaris containers, machine containers, the LXC project. But I think what happened was we started realizing that as we really do have a greater need for distributed compute to solve modern compute problems like AI and machine learning and big data problems and analytics problems, we now have to build our applications for atomicity and scale. LXC is not for the faint of heart. It's just as powerful as Docker, but the tooling is harder, and there isn't as much of an environment and an ecosystem built up around it. So I really think all Docker did was come along and say, okay, well, this LXC has got enormous potential to modernize the way that we can do deployments according to the limitations that we're going to have and the types of problems that we're going to solve. LXC is fantastic for doing that. Why don't we just build better tooling around it? And that's really what Docker did. And I mean, the fact that you can just say, Docker run Node.js, and a few seconds later, I've got a whole container pulled from a public repository with a Node.js runtime, and I'm ready to go. There just never was anything like that for something like LXC, even a more modern container platform. And then when you add something like Kubernetes on top of that, it's like, wow. I mean, why would you even want to try anything else? So again, no, not new, but better tooling to accomplish problems that have arisen out of the fact that we're solving completely different problems with computers today than we were 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time, which is really sad, because I get the impression we could talk for a long time about lots of things.
I would love to talk more.
Yeah, between the three of us, I'm sure we could talk about lots of things and get October in on this as well, because I'm sure he's got some opinions. But is there anything that you want to kind of get across to our audience about OpenLogic and about what you guys are doing there before we run out of time?
I'd say come check us out. And if in your business there's a lot of talk right now about whether you should purchase some type of enterprise open source, something like an enterprise MongoDB, we're seeing a lot of that, or like a Confluent or something, send us an email. I mean, just come have a conversation, or even don't even worry about going through business channels, right? I mean, I do a lot of this kind of stuff on my own, conferences and things like that. Reach out to me. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email or something. I'm very open to talking to all of you. This is a part of the market that is so near and dear to me. And if there's anything I can do to help your business, consider looking at a community edition of a piece of software before you shell out for that license. I'd love to at least have that conversation. So I would say, even if you don't talk to me, be thoughtful about it. Know that you're doing that what you're doing for a reason, and that you can comfortably pass the smell test when it comes to paying out those enterprise licenses.
Excellent. Now, before we let you go, Justin, I do have to ask you two very important questions that our audience always want us to ask everyone. It's a thing Randall does every time, every show. So the first question is, what is your favorite scripting language? It's a tough one. It can be a tough one.
Really depends on what I'm doing. Do you know what? And Randall's going to like this. I'm going to have to say Perl, and not because it's the most powerful, and not because it has the most modules, and not because I could build amazing big enterprise applications off of it necessarily in 2019, but it is the language that took me from doing script kiddie stuff in Visual Basic and then things like that into doing real programming. So I'm going to have to go with Perl. I love my Python. I love my Node.js. I'm loving Go. But I'm gonna have to go with Perl as the one closest to the heart. So you're welcome, Randall.
Yeah, that will make Randall very happy. Don't worry about that. Good. And it's a great language. I mean, I joke a lot, like I've got any juice in the programming world, but I kind of joke a lot, but about Perl with Randall just to wind him up. But yeah, it is an amazing language.
People give me so much crap for as much evangelism as I do around Perl. But Larry Wall is one of my favorite people, and his philosophies of development. I think he's the one who said the most important thing ever said the three most important characteristics of a good software developer are laziness, impatience, and hubris. Hubris, I think, is the most important one. That was Larry Wall. That was the inventor of the Perl programming language. The guy is a ninja and a master.
Yeah, words to live by there, I think, in my book. And then finally, our other question before we let you go is text editor. What environment or text editor do you like to work in?
I like Vim, and I'm going to duck.
No, I think as long as Randall's not here, you're fine, because I like Vim as well.
Yeah, I do. Well, I do as well. We both like Vim, so we're good.
It is important to call out always, though, that Emacs technically was the first free software project ever launched. So whether you like it or not, it was the first piece of official open source, released by Richard Stallman in 1976.
Very true. And of course, we're agnostic here when it comes to things like that. So, other text editors are available, and they're all, as good as each other, and use whatever is the right tool for you, I suppose, it would be the thing. All right. And so thanks very much, Justin. It's been great to talk to you. And I'm sure we'll speak to you again sometime in future. But thanks very much for joining us.
I'd love it, Dan. A lot of fun, and talk to you all soon. Thanks again.
All right, then. That was Justin Reock, who's the chief architect at OpenLogic. So go and check out OpenLogic. Really great discussion. I think we could have gone on for a long time there, as I said. I mean, the guys in the Twit office wouldn't appreciate it, but I'm sure they'd get cut off at some point. But yeah, I'm sure we could have gone on a long time. So, Aaron, what did you think?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and that's the reason we had Justin on, was to get his point of view, right, on what's going on in open source software, not just to pimp his work or his project. We were happy to give him some kudos and let him do that, but it really was to get his feedback, and he had some really good opinions. And one of the things that I think really kind of struck me as we were talking is this, the way I was thinking about it is we've kind of done this to ourselves, right? We've made open source successful, which is great, right? Generally, but then it's led a little bit to our demise when we start talking about new technologies, new ways to deploy, like cloud. You guys were talking about Kubernetes and deploying, the problem with licenses. We've kind of led ourselves into this tool sprawl, license sprawl environment here as people have moved to new technologies and cloud. And so then all of a sudden there is this debacle that we've let ourselves into of, wow, we have so many more entities within our environment now. It becomes very difficult to kind of figure out, how to deal with all of that. And, when do I go enterprise? When do I stay pure open source? It's a question that a lot of companies have. And so I think it's worth discussing, and I'm glad we had that discussion today.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, I agree. It's a discussion that I'm sure many people will be repeating in various offices around the world all the time. All right, and so we've got some other guests coming up on the show. I'm quickly opening the spreadsheet and looking at what we've got coming up. We've got on July the 31st, which is next week, as I'm talking to you now, Gareth McCumsky from Serverless, who's going to talk to us about the serverless framework, which is a really exciting thing that's going on at the moment. Everybody's talking about serverless. fabulous. I feel like I need to know more about it, so that'll be good. We can talk about that next week. And then there's a gap. We've got a little bit of a gap, and then we've got on August the 14th at the moment, we've got Jason Crome from Sawyer X Dancer, Pearl Dancer, sorry. That's the name of the project, I presume. This is something Randall would know way more about, so let's hope he's back for that. Pearldancer.org is the place to go and find out more about the project, and tune in and find out more on the show, of course. If you want to watch the show taping live, you can do that. It's on live.twit.tv every Wednesday at 9:30 in the morning. That's West Coast time, California time, Leo time, as we like to call it. So you can find it there. You can find out more about the show. You can find us on Twitter if you go to @FlossWeekly, which is our Twitter handle. You can find us on all over the place. Find us on the Twit website, twit.tv. And if you think of a project that you would like to hear from, you know of a project that you think should be a guest on this show, then great, we want to hear about it. But the best thing to do in that case is to contact someone from the project, preferably the project leader if you know them or you've got contact for them, and ask them to get in touch with Randall via merlin@stonehenge.com. That's his email address, Merlin with a Y @stonehenge.com, and then we can get them straight onto the schedule. That's a great way of getting to hear more about the projects that you care about, and we love it when people do that. All right, and so hopefully Randall will be back fairly soon, in the next week or whenever. And very quickly before we go, I want to, on a personal note, ask you to take a quick look at OggCamp, which is an event that I run. That's OGGCAMP. It's an open source event, largest one in the UK. It's our 10th birthday this year. If you look for oggcamp.org, oggcamp.org, you can find out more there, and I won't go on too long about that. So, Aaron, anything you want to mention before we get out of here?
Well, there was a new version of the Raspberry Pi that came out.
Oh man, there was.
Sorry about that. The Raspberry Pi is so exciting. Every time I mention it, that happens. But if you're looking for a good book, maybe to give to somebody in regards to learning Linux on the Raspberry Pi, you can pick up my book, Linux for Makers. There it is. So I need to move this way. Linux for Makers. It's available on Amazon. It's a good primer for people that are like, yeah, what is this directory structure? I don't get it. Maybe they're used to a more graphical interface. So go pick up Linux for Makers at all the better bookstores and online stores, whatever they're called, online.
Excellent. Online retailers. I thought you were going to do the classic. It's available all good bookstores and probably some bad ones as well. That's the usual thing. Yeah. All right. And so, Aaron, thank you very much for joining us at the last minute. It was great to have you on. Thanks for your questions and everything. It's always great to catch up. And I'll speak to you again soon. Sounds good. It was good to talk to you again, Dan. Excellent. All right. And so that about does it for this time. That's it for this Floss Weekly. We'll see you next time for another Floss Weekly.